So friends, for today's video, I wanted to have a bit of a rant, if we're being honest, about something that I have noticed as of late that I find to be somewhat insensitive at the very least. I wouldn't go as far as to say that this is incredibly troublesome or that I'm very concerned, but it's something that I am a bit uncomfortable with, that I'm curious your thoughts about all this, and feel free as we progress through and get into details about this to say if you have an opposing view, to state that and why, because this is something where I can absolutely see there being other viewpoints that make me challenge the perception I have of this scenario. Before we get into the specifics, this is part of a mini video series that I've been doing as we've been getting to the end of this first half of 2025. I like to, around the mid-year, reflect on trends that I've been seeing pop up, which ones I am not a fan of, which ones I am, which ones I'm neutral on, but just curious to see what happens with them moving forward. And I typically do this within a formal trends video. I still plan to do that this year, so if you're interested in partaking, I will be asking all of your input and your thoughts over on my community tab, so be on the lookout for that. But I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into some specific trends rather than taking what I'm calling a cursory glance at them within a trends video. I wanted to ensure that we actually had the time to dig into some of these in a more thorough way. And I wanted to especially do that with this one because I'm so on the fence about it and wondering maybe I'm just being a little sensitive here. And if that's the case, then that's the case and I'm okay admitting that. But I wanted to at least offer this conversation up to all of you. So it will take some context to explain. So we'll start with that and then we'll get into why I am so on the fence about it. Getting into the trend itself, this is something that maybe some of you have seen, maybe some of you have never seen this, but the idea is within lists where people have examples of some kind of specific thing. So I do this style of video on my channel all the time, like books with great worlds or something like that. And sometimes you will see books that will make you cry. And then there's a list of a bunch of books that are known to be very emotional. And I don't have a problem with those kinds of lists. I don't have a problem with that specific kind of list, just to be clear. I don't mind. I know for myself, if you tell me like, oh my gosh, this book made me cry, my interest is probably piqued because I do really enjoy stories that aren't afraid to dig into darker places, that aren't afraid to tackle heavier themes. And oftentimes those things result in us crying. That's not a bad thing. And I really respect when authors aren't afraid to approach some of these topics that are less about being more palatable and more marketable and instead are really, really focusing and zeroing in on some of the worst parts of our existence. I think that that is a great thing to explore within fiction. And also, it happens in nonfiction as well. But I found myself quite uncomfortable with, and I've seen this happen a number of times, which is when certain books end up on these lists. The one that really kind of had this alarm bell go off in my head was Chanel Miller's memoir, Know My Name. I do want to clarify, if somebody is talking about books that they've read recently, let's say they're doing some kind of wrap up, and they happen to say, oh my gosh, this book made me cry. That's fine. I don't have an issue with that. And I also don't think there's any harm intended in having this book be on this kind of a list of books that will make you cry or books to read if you want to cry. I don't think anybody means anything negative by this, and this is a very emotional book. If you don't know anything about it, I will get into details here in just a moment. But I think it is borderline weird to have it on these lists because I think it begs the question of why are you wanting... I don't know that you should, I guess. Now I'm going from a question to just a statement, but I don't know if you should pick that book up just because you feel like crying. Because it's very, I don't feel like that's the point of that book. So if you don't know about this book, let me explain why this is so awkward for me. And also the juxtaposition of this book next to some of the other books that pop up on these lists. I'm like, this is so weird. So this is a nonfiction story. Story is probably not the right way to word it when I just said it's nonfiction. It is a memoir, and it is detailing what transpired for Chanel Miller after she was, and I want to make clear this is a heavy topic, so if you need to not watch this portion. If you need to skip ahead, I'll have a timestamp. But she was assaulted. And the details surrounding that are horrific. She was not conscious. This person who assaulted her took her outside, and they started to try to do things to her. And the luckily only reason that he was caught is because two people happened to have been riding their bicycles outside. They saw what he was doing, and they stopped him. They pulled him off of her, and they kept him from doing anything. However, she wakes up in the hospital and has no idea what's going on, and they're asking her all these questions. They had to do things that were somewhat invasive in order to determine the full extent of what he did. And she's waking up, if I'm remembering correctly, she's very detailed in her recollection of all of this, but she still had like leaves in her hair, and there's just this shock of this happening to her, and also this sort of like gap in her mind. And she knows that this happened because people are telling her it did and there were witnesses, but she doesn't really remember it super vividly. And she's trying to get through life after this event. Additionally, because he committed a crime, she is now having so much of her life roped into him having to deal with the legal repercussions of his actions. However, this young man who did this was kind of an up-and-coming athlete, and he was from a well-off family, and the media picked up on this story. She was remaining anonymous for a long time, so nobody really knew who she was or her name or anything about her, but they did know him, and because they had a favorable view of him as just being this great student and this great athlete, the media and people online immediately took his side despite all of the evidence against him. They took his side and they framed her in the most horrific and awful ways. She talks about seeing people say things like she probably just wanted to cheat on her boyfriend, and then claimed that he did this against her will because she didn't want to get in trouble with her boyfriend. Just awful things were said. So she's having to deal with all these people just create this false narrative about her. She's watching it happen. She's having to try to keep going with her life, but then, as stated, she's also having to consistently have to deal with the legal things that are happening. And then by the end of what is a really trying time for her, when all is said and done, it makes me upset just thinking about it. He serves, if I'm not mistaken, 3 months. That is it. 3 months. It's infuriating. It is really hard to read through, which I'm doing the very thing that I said I don't mind people doing. I don't mind people articulating that this is an emotional thing to get through and to read, because it is. I feel like you'd have to have no emotions whatsoever to pick up this memoir and not find yourself so angry and upset and emotional on her behalf. But it's so weird to me to see this listed on a list of books that will make you cry next to things like House in the Cerulean Sea or something, where I'm just like, okay, I get that people cry at both of these, but is this just me having the ick? I mean, am I alone in thinking this is so weird and borderline insensitive to be like, oh, this will make you cry, and then putting this on the list? Like, yeah, probably, it might. It very well does for a lot of people accomplish making them cry. But I think it's weird because a lot of times fiction, yes, some fiction is meant to go into darker places. And maybe there's even a work of fiction that is meant to try and go through these various almost identical topics, and it does so in maybe a fantasy world, or it does so in a contemporary setting, but it wasn't a real event, but it's very much based in things that actually happen. And when we pick up a work of fiction, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I go into a work of fiction kind of with a different intention of what I expect from that work of fiction and what I assume the intention of the work is. I think there's more of an understanding that you may very well get some darker and heavier things, but the intention is to try and still tell a story. And that's not to say there isn't an art to the memoir, or that there isn't there aren't some authors of memoirs who are exceptional writers, because there are some authors of memoirs that have exquisite writing, sometimes better than the writing that we see in fiction. So it's not to say that the writing doesn't matter or that it's not a thing to have a conversation about within these sorts of stories or within these sorts of books. But when I'm looking at a fictional story, I still am like more so focused on, or maybe not more so, but I feel like the way in which emotion is conveyed and these heavier things are conveyed is still part of like a narrative and still part of a story. And I don't want to go as far as to say the point is always to entertain, because that's not true. I think most of us know that the point of reading is not solely to entertain us, and that's also not the sole purpose of fiction either. I think a lot of fiction can teach us so much about the world, about each other, about different experiences from our own, or even understanding our own experiences by holding up a mirror to what we've gone through. So I think fiction can do all of these same things. But I think the reason that it feels so odd to me is because Chanel Miller is a real person. What she went through she's not telling us this, or I guess I don't want to speak for her and decide like what her intention was in telling this. I think I would assume though that some of it is kind of opening people's eyes to what it's like to go through something like that, the way that our media, the way it handles these sorts of situations, the way society handles them, the way the legal system works around these sorts of things. I think it was to open people's eyes about it. And there is something very powerful about the fact the book is called Know My Name after she remained anonymous. They're sort of like, I'm claiming the things that happened, and I am sort of almost like forcing you to acknowledge that there are all of these issues that exist. But I can't imagine, I guess, if I knew her personally, I don't know, I don't think I could ever be like, oh, man, I just need a good cry. Can you tell me about that time? Like, that stuff happened to you again? Because that always gets me. Like, that's so weird. That's so weird, because that's essentially, I feel like what these sorts of lists that are like books that'll make you cry, what they're doing when they list this memoir on them, where it's like, that's not, the point isn't to serve you, I suppose, in a weird way. And I know that that's not necessarily the sole point of fiction either. This is why I'm like, it's kind of a rant, but also I've tried to think through why this is so bothersome to me. And typically, if I'm going to present a thought online, I try to have a view first. Not to say that I try to be so stuck in a view that I'm not willing to hear other people and take in their thoughts and be flexible and willing to change. But more so that I don't want to just throw something out there and be careless about it. But this is one of those scenarios where I'm like, why is this so bothersome to me? I think it is odd because it's a real human being, and I can't imagine trying to use a real human being's real lived experiences for my emotional roller coasters so that I feel something. And I really don't think anybody means anything by it. I'm not saying anybody who's done this, it's like, wow, how could you be so flippant and callous towards this? I don't think anybody's doing anything with bad intentions. But this is not the only memoir that is covering really heavy topics that has been presented on these sorts of lists before. I've also seen Jeanette McCurdy's memoir on there, and you're like, I mean, you're looking for a book that'll make you cry, so you pick up the one about somebody who was whose mother abused them and forced them into an eating disorder from the time they were a child that they almost died. That's the thing that you're like, I'm in the need, I really could use a good cry. Let me look up a list, books that'll make me cry. Oh, that's a good one. Like, I just don't think, that's just so awkward and weird, and this is why I'm saying it's insensitive a little bit, because I'm like, I don't think we should be talking about these books quite in this way, and I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to moralize and be looking down at people. And, you know, you can think, of course, you can feel however you feel about these things. Maybe you agree with me completely. Maybe you're even more upset. But I really don't want this to be framed as the people who have put these on lists, whether they're bloggers or bookstagrammers or booktubers, or they work for some kind of company and they're meant to compile lists to put on some kind of website. I don't know who the people are that are doing this. I've just seen this happen time and time again. And I just kind of want us to take a step back and ask, like, is this appropriate? I don't know. But am I being ridiculous? Am I being ridiculous? maybe. If I am, then I'm being, maybe it's just a me thing. Maybe it's just me. And if it's just me, then this is just how I feel. And when I see it, I'll be uncomfortable and then I'll move on. But maybe some of you can pinpoint, maybe you can provide additional reasons why in a way that is more cohesive and clear and concise than my rambling on and on about this. But yeah, I think it's odd to have memoirs about these horrific things that have happened in these people's lives and then have it on a list of books that'll make you cry next to things like House in the Cerulean Sea. Sad is a reaction to, as a result of empathy and decency and compassion. That's a reaction to sad things that are transpiring. But to me, a news story that's relaying horrific news to you is trying to inform you so that you are aware of issues. You can make more informed purchases, and because oftentimes our money correlates to suffering in places, and you can be a more informed voter and like those sorts of things. That to me is closer to a memoir and the intention of a lot of memoirs. And it feels like we dismiss the very difficult process of putting out a memoir that is like both of these that I've mentioned. It's like we're reducing them to what they can do for our tears. But anyway, I'll have some of the other videos I've been doing for trends that I've been noticing within 2025. And if you're interested in those, they're not as heavy as today's, but if you're interested in those, I'll have them linked. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.